Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pharmaceutical Soccer. So excited for you to be here. We are now less than 2 weeks away from Nashville SC season starting, preseason heating up. Everything's finally hitting. Valaire, Clay, how are you both doing this time? Are you guys prepared? Are you ready for the season to be starting?
Yeah, as ready as I could be. I think this one's a little more exciting because of the 615 stuff that we're doing. I think it's like a different way of starting the season. Last season we started and it was kind of like, yeah, here more of the same. But now things are spicing up a little bit. We have I want to take this time first and foremost to say that we do have a new member of the Pharma family. And we failed as a group to introduce him last week. So I don't want to time. Also, he is on the call right now, so it's hard to forget. So we have a video man. We have a producer, Omari, of course. You don't see or hear often, but he's there. And now we have video man Joel. I don't know. Shout out Joel. Team. He's gonna be doing a lot of the video stuff for us. So if you didn't notice, last episode was there was a video element to it for those who are Kappa members, 615 Soccer. That video was done by the one and only Joel. So shout out to him. Shout out to joining our team. We've been wanting to do something like that, and we're really excited for him joining us. So just wanted to say that. And I know that completely was not in the rundown, but I just remembered. So
Hey, look, I'm used to at least the both of you taking the show in some way direction and then me being blamed for it later. It's perfectly understandable. So I get that. But how was the weekends?
Well, I'll go ahead and take it in a weird direction. So my weekend was all right. I went to Athlete, the pro women's basketball league that's happening in town, and had a good time with that. And then I watched the movie Moonstruck yesterday from 1987, and for somehow it was up for Best Picture in 1987, and I'm totally flummoxed as to how. So Cher won Best Actress over Meryl and some other named people that I'm forgetting right now for that movie, and I do not get it. I don't get it. I don't understand it. So anyway, to Moonstruck, I guess. I also told my wife I was 100% going to mention it after I was so confused by it.
um I ended up watching the football game that was in between the Kendrick Lamar concert, and it was not a good football game at all. Not that I cared who won or anything, but really enjoyed the Kendrick Lamar concert though. I wish there was more of that, less the football, personally.
Yeah, it was. I was caught off guard by some of the song choices from the Kendrick Lamar concert. Although one song choice, acting like he wasn't going to play that song
That
whenever
was
it's
good.
been, won 5 Grammys a few weeks ago. It's like
That was
he's
good. Yeah, and I
obviously
mean,
going to play
like,
that.
I think it was what everybody needed. Well, not everybody. I'm sure there are some people on Facebook complaining this morning, but everybody who isn't who isn't not um who isn't a party pooper. How about that? There you go.
And speaking of the Super Bowl, is do we think that was the best MLS commercial that you've ever seen? Because I think for
Wait, I
me,
missed it.
it's probably up there.
It was
I
really
missed it.
good. You missed the MLS commercial, Valaire?
Is it the Messi one, like where he like dribbles a football?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
he's
was during the
juggling.
broadcast.
Yep.
I think it was right after the game. Yeah.
Oh, I only saw it on TikTok afterwards. I didn't know it was like a real commercial. I thought it was just like a social media stuff. It's a
No,
nice commercial.
I mean, it's a great commercial. I don't know whether it was or not because I was watching a stream, but
Yeah,
yeah, I saw the commercial and was floored. It was a great commercial. Very rarely do I get super excited about a messy MLS Apple thing because
right.
it's kind of uh, overexposure for MLS fans, but it was a great commercial.
Apple decided to pay what they paid for MLS and the rights of MLS in one season on a commercial in its entirety. So I'll take it. That's fun. Um, yeah, I mean, look, we're 2 weeks now away from the season start. I had a good weekend as well, by the way. Thank you guys for asking and caring about me. I appreciate it. in Michigan at the current moment. Thanks, Clay. Appreciate you. Uh, yeah, no, like, look, it is 2 weeks now from the season starting. We've now seen, a couple preseason games. We've started to see some of these lineups specifically. A lot of the a lot of the speculation is now turning into just kind of just form and what this team is going to be, what the lineups are going to be like. How are you guys feeling now that a lot of the speculation for how the team is going to line up, the players surrounding it, who the roster is, how much better are you guys feeling now in comparison to even a month ago? When a month ago, there was a lot more questions to be asked, a lot more things to be worried about. Are you guys as worried now? Or is that speculation still there for you?
I mean, we'll get into the specifics of that, I guess, in the next segment. But for me, I feel as clueless as I did before the preseason started. I think that the bits and pieces that we've gotten have seemed hopeful, I guess, in terms of form, in terms of the team not looking like they did at the end of last season. But honestly, it's still a lot up in the air. There's still a lot unanswered about how this team plays, and you can't really learn a whole lot from preseason anyway, because like we've seen good preseasons, we've seen bad preseasons, and those don't necessarily translate one way or the other when the actual season starts. And but thing that I like the most is it does seem like the closest to a it's the closest to a complete team that we've seen Nashville have at this point of the year in a few years. Like there's some pieces that Nashville could add, but we aren't sitting here saying there's this one glaring piece that Nashville doesn't have, which is something that we've said at the beginning of every season the last 4 or 5 years.
I think the other, it has been clear to me that this is a new start. Even though BJ Callahan came in last season, he was pretty much pretty much just continuing on what was already established and trying to install one or two ideas. We are looking at a brand new way of Nashville SC operating and playing. And that has come with a lot of excitement, rightly so. We don't know. We don't, like Clay said, it's still up in the air because change is awesome when folks have been asking for it for so long, right? There's been people asking for change from year one, which makes no sense, right? Because they just started. But anyway, years with Gary Smith, Nashville became predictable. I know we've talked about this. Nashville became predictable in the business they're doing, became predictable on the pitch, became predictable as an organization as a whole, especially after all the glamorous stadium is gone and all the the MVP is no longer the MVP and all that stuff was gone. There was just nothing to keep things exciting for Nashville, and this by far has been the most excited people have been for stuff directly on the pitch, out of the stadium and in the awards and all that. So I think that's one thing that makes this year feels a little bit different. Not only are we speculating what's going to happen, but that speculation is like very much, it's a much larger speculation than Nashville has ever had because we always have known to be a known quantity around the league, at least to a certain extent.
Yeah, I find it interesting in my perspective, just because I do believe like the speculation is still there for me at least. Like I still don't know if we're going to finish in first place or we're going to finish in 14th in the East. Like I still have no idea where this team is going to line up in comparison to other teams in the East. But that's kind of fun. I think it's kind of fun to have that uncertainty going into this season and the expectation for this team. Um, to just let them. I get to let them play. You know what I mean? Like I get to let them have fun and let them play.
This feels in a lot of ways very similar to 2020. Like 2020, I mean, we don't have necessarily the carefree aspect, but like in 2020, I joked on here, it's like they can lose every game. And, it's the first year in MLS. I'm going to be excited every single time going to the stadium. So we don't have like maybe the expectations being that low, but we do have the expectation in that this is a team that is in the process. And it's a first year head coach getting his first off season, and so I think that a lot of people, I think their expectations are rightly on the playoffs. I think that that is a perfectly rational expectation for every MLS team. I think every MLS team should enter the season
Yeah,
thinking they can make the playoffs because it's not that hard in terms of like, it's like 9 teams. I mean, every team should think they can make the playoffs. But that being said, if Nashville were to just slightly miss the playoffs but show signs, I think a lot of fans would be okay. Maybe not okay, but they would understand and they would be giving of that sort of result. That being said, I think that there are a lot of people that are going to think that this is the return of, Nashville being good. And I don't know that that's totally fair, but I don't see how you can say that it's not possible.
Yep. No. And I mean, look, the team still has a couple preseason matches to go. They are currently back in Florida, I believe. Right, Valer? They are back in Florida for a match against DC, and then they do make the trip to Austin for a preseason match as well. Um, so they have a little bit more time. The one against Columbus was very interesting because we did not get any information about that. Valer, how was that press conference afterwards of
I
getting?
didn't attend. So I'm sorry. Shout out Ben though. Go back, Ben or I did, and there's a write up out there on 615soccer.com if you're interested on the press conference specifically. But I think overall we got lineups and we got that Adam Sipich scored, and those were the only go out there and assume that if Nashville had scored more than once, those videos will be posted as well. That's just my assumption. I honestly have no information, so don't hold me accountable to any of that. I don't know anything else. So, well, I'm maybe anyway. At the end of the day, it's a preseason game. The result doesn't really matter a whole lot. And like Steven said, there are two more to go. I'd be willing to bet that those games will be more so on the more similar to the other preseason games where we will get a score line, we will get a lineup, maybe even a few videos of the goals and whatnot. So that would be my assumption. Still, we don't know for sure. The one against DC is in Florida on Wednesday, and then on Saturday they'll be taking on Austin in Austin, and then after that, I'm back to Nashville to prepare for that next weekend game, which would be against the New England Revolution, which will be the season opener and home opener.
Yes, absolutely. Again, the season is starting soon. I mean, next week we get to do prop bet episode, which is crazy. Be on the lookout for information for that, by the way. We are going to have the listeners get more involved in the prop bets this season, and I'm very excited about that. So be on the lookout for that as well. But next, we're going to talk a little bit more about those preseason games, and we are going to do some more speculation for the season. And we're going to do that next, right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer. And we are back right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer at Pharma Soccer on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You could also check us out at 615 Soccer. Go there. Would love for you to be a part of the 615 family that we are building, the 615 Mafia, as they say, or Ben Wright has
Steven says.
coined. But yes, go to 615soccer.com. A lot of great content going on there, especially with the season coming even closer together. I just want to say before we kind of get into the actual segments, you both did an amazing job last week with David Gass. I appreciate it. Like, you guys did so good last week. It was a really good episode.
Thanks.
We
I
appreciate
think
that.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to that, by the way, and you're listening to this, definitely go back and listen to it because it's not very like time specific. We talked very big general points about MLS and Nashville SC and soccer in America and whole as a whole. So thanks for that plug, Steven. Thought it was a pretty good interview as well with David Goss of Soccer Wise.
And also, just real quick before we get going, there may have been some technical difficulties there in that first segment. We have hopefully resolved them for this segment. So, if you had any issues there, it should be a pretty clean listen from here on out. So, that being said, Let's get to the prognosticating.
And as always, for the technical difficulties, blame Amari. Okay, so we are going to kind of talk about the season in a very interesting way, and I kind of like the way that Clay has kind of set this out. So I kind of want him to take the lead on this, with why he is kind of asking these questions now, and what he's looking to get out of asking these questions.
So I think a lot of us, out in the world have are known as the soccer guy in our workplace or in our friend group. Especially if you're listening to the show, especially if you're paying to listen to the show, you're really tuned in to Nashville SC. And something that a lot of we've been saying it on this show, but we've also been saying it when people ask, are they going to be any good this year? Is the go-to phrase is that the ceiling has never been, higher than it is, but the floor has also never been lower. So it's like we don't really know what we're getting into with this Nashville SC season, which we kind of alluded to in the first segment. And so I'm kind of looking for us to say what that actually means. What do we mean when we say that? And so what does that mean? Like, what does the ceiling for this team mean? Why do we say that the ceiling has never been higher? So, what is the optimist view on the season? Like, how does the ideal Nashville SC season in realistic terms, like, what does that look like? And then after we talk about the good stuff, let's talk about the bad stuff. Why do we say the floor has never been lower? Like, what is the skeptical view on the roster build and on the process going forward? And so, first off, everything's rosy, so we can kind of start with that. Like, what is the optimistic outlook on this team? What is the most, you know, at least realistic adjacent thing that you could say going forward for what this team can be?
I think to start off the business that's been done so far in terms of transfers, I think that is the biggest sort of representation of what you're talking about, Clay. And since we started with the optimistic view, I will start with the more positive thing is that Nashville SC got younger. Nashville SC went and got professionals who are not only younger and unproven quantities, but proven quantities in their own right. When you talk about somebody like Edward Taxeth, he's a young player who's played, over 100 matches. When you talk about even the older signings like Andy Nahar and Palacios, these are people with a substantial amount of experience within MLS and outside of it. And same thing with Brian Acosta, who, these are players who have been not only playing for some of them, playing also for their national teams, not only just for their clubs. So when you talk about the actual experience that you're bringing into the squad, a squad that hasn't had a whole lot of trophy success, even if they've had other success, these players coming in, some of them have won trophies, have won things, whether it's again club or country, and then you look at the profile of the players that have been signed by Nashville SC thus far. They're all players that seem to fit what BJ Callahan is preaching, right? What BJ Callahan is saying, has been saying for a while. They are active players. They are players who want the ball. They all seem a lot more comfortable with the ball at their feet than anyone else who left the club already. And that goes for every single player, even the defenders. So when you see stuff like that happen, that has to force you to be a little bit more positive than usual when it comes to new signings.
Well, and I think that you can take that on to the current players as well. Like last season, on the basis of, the seasons beforehand, proved to be or would hope to prove to be an anomaly. Like Hani Mukhtar had an okay, not good, not great, maybe good at best season. He was not the Hani Mukhtar of the 3 years prior. So is it more likely that it's an anomaly and that he's closer to, one of the best DPs in the league, one of the best, center midfielders, one of the most productive center midfielder, or like center midfielder attacking pieces that the league has ever seen? Or is he, fallen off? And I think that it's kind of hard to say, just assume that he's falling off when the whole team's not doing well. I think that you look at guys who had maybe seasons that weren't necessarily as good as they had been in the past, like a Jack Mayer, like a Walker Zimmerman, things like that. You look at it and say, well, you know, maybe that was just a one off and that's going to change and they'll get back to the form that we know them for. the next year. So I think when you look at the players, it's not just the players coming in, it's the players that you still have. And if you're taking an optimistic viewpoint, you think that maybe there's a return to form because the voice has changed in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And like from my perspective, just the optimist viewpoint, what I hope and expect for the season is for this excitement for this team to continue. And I think that is the easiest, most optimistic approach for me that I have. Of course, I want the playoffs. Of course, I want all of this. But I think it's been a while since we've had a preseason, uh, kind of like this that
Apologies there. We might have
Yeah.
lost
for the
Steven.
season upcoming.
Um, Steven, we lost you for a little bit. But I will jump in and say the other part of the optimistic view as well is not just the signings, but BJ Callahan in general. What BJ Callahan has been able to bring to this market is a fresh view and a fresh take on the game that, frankly, Nashville hadn't played before. And we saw bits of it last season, but it's still, like I said in the first segment, it wasn't a product where he was he helped create. Where now you're looking at a product he's helping create, not just manage. And I think that is a big piece going into 2025 because Nashville fans are going to Geodis Park and either not knowing exactly what they're in for or knowing that it's going to be a little more exciting, a little bit more, attacking, I guess, or just a little bit more pressure from the players, a little more active in general than what we had seen previously with Gary Smith.
Well, and then the other BJ side of this with the optimism, of course, is that he is still learning, and there are things that you can look to from last year that maybe he probably would do differently now that he has the experience to not make some of those decisions. On the other side, like to continue off of that, rather, his experience outside of the national team is with Philadelphia. I think it's fairly obvious that he's never had the resources at hand as an assistant at Philadelphia. He never had the resources that he now has with Nashville. Philadelphia is a team that, by rule, isn't spending a ton of money on players. By rule, isn't maybe taking some of the risks or gambling on players in a way that Nashville is doing this year. And I think they're calculated risks. I want to be clear. I think that there's some reasoning behind that. But like he's at a team that can say to $1 million player, we're good with you. We're just going to cut you and go sign a different $1 million player, which is not necessarily something that Philadelphia has been known to do. Like Philadelphia has DPs, but their mindset is to build their team from within. They're not going to spend a lot of money on an outside player. And I don't think that you can say that about Nashville. Nashville will go out and spend money if it deems it worthy and has. Um, More so than they're given credit for, I think.
Yep.
And yeah, this show is way too positive at the current moment. We're never supposed to be this positive. It's not, it's like we're supposed to be way more negative, and we need to get to that. So let's talk about the skeptics view of the season. I know this is Clay's favorite thing to do is to be a skeptic when it comes to this team. What if you were going to look at it from the other side of non-optimism, if you are going to look from a skepticism point of view, where does that take you when it comes to this team?
It's funny
I
because
mean,
like my reputation is typically to be overly positive, and I think I've been hit on a few people like that have got said that I've been a little negative on certain things, but
yeah.
I think that there's some clear ones, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, Valer, so you can go ahead.
No, 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 it's fine. It's fine. I just figured I am more equipped to do this since you are the positive guy. I was like, I'll at least get it started. But I think the first thing is you can use the same exact reasoning for what we said on the first part of this, the optimistic part of this, and flip it on his head and say this is the negative part, right? You look at the signings. Okay, you still signed Brian Acosta, who never really hit it off in MLS, was never able to reach a level in MLS. Andy Nahar's 31, right? That's something to say. Taxeth, it takes a while to adjust to MLS, right? We've said that before. Stuff like that you can bring up. And I think it's what it's going to come down to is the actual individual players and the trust that Nashville SC and BJ Callahan and the front office is putting on these players is whether or not is in the right place, whether or not that trust in the right place, and whether or not those players have what it takes to perform to beat out the allegation, the too old allegation, or the never made it allegation, or the whatever allegation it is, and go out there and perform. And that's still up in the air. And since we haven't seen a lot of these players, all the new signings, we've never seen them play for Nashville SC. Maybe somebody like Johnny Perez, we can make a pretty informed, educated guess about him, and maybe a little bit of a prediction. For these players, it's all a prediction. We can't really come up with a good informed guess because I don't know. I didn't watch the Norwegian league. I didn't watch. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I didn't watch the Honduran league either. So I,
What?
I can tell you what Andy Hart did with DC United 5 years ago or whatever, 10 years ago now, but that doesn't really help us in this situation, right? So I think there's a lot of unknown, and with unknown, if you can go the positive way or the skeptic way, right? And then I will say on my other point, which was BJ Callahan. Look, this is a guy who we've talked about it. He hasn't managed a team before. This is his first team. This is his first transfer window. This is his first everything that's happening with Nashville SC, right? And he's saying the right things. I want to be clear here. He is saying the right things. He sounds like somebody who is able to lead people. He sounds like somebody who's very, very knowledgeable of the game. Every conversation I've had with him, I've learned something about soccer tactics. So I don't want to come out as negative here. But at the end of the day, he is unproven. And he will tell you that himself. He needs to go out there and prove himself. And 2025 is that season for him. However, at the moment, as we speak, he is unproven.
And I think the age thing is an interesting one because we've talked a lot about how like this Nashville team has gotten younger. It's gotten younger. But then you start to like kind of peel it back. It's still not a young team. Joe Willis is 37. Both Hani Mukhtar and Alex Muyl are going to turn 30 during the season, which it sounds weird to classify that as old, but let's be honest. In soccer years, it's on the wrong side. And then you've got, Daniel Lovitz, who's 33. You're bringing in Nahar. I mean, Brugman and uh, Acosta aren't like young players either. So like you're still banking on a veteran core just in a different way than you were banking on them in years past. So it's still an older team. Now, I think people overrate age when it comes to MLS because what does it matter if you're only planning on getting 2 or 3 years out of them, whether you get those years when they're 30 or 33 or 27? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. And so I'm not as concerned about that. I am concerned about depth. Um, I do think that the one of the things you could say about the previous year's teams is that even though it wasn't ideal, there was depth at a couple of positions that you felt like you would have at least a replacement level player in those spots. I think because we've kind of elevated the ceiling, there's a depth issue there because there will be a bigger drop off from like guy A to guy B up and down the roster. We're used to that at the front of the like on the attack, but I think we're going to see that in other places this year that we haven't in the last year or two. And so I am worried about that. I'm worried if the midfield puzzle pieces don't fit together correctly. I think they will. I think this midfield is constructed in a way that it will fit together properly. But we did say that before and in the past, and then it did not fit in a way that you would have thought it would. Because it's one of those things that's kind of like it's hard to tell when you aren't watching it week in and week out, which we aren't watching week in and week out right now with a bunch of new midfield pieces. And you know, we've talked about Callahan and trying to figure out whether or not he is or isn't the guy a lot on this show. So I'm not I don't need to belabor that point. I do think that it's worth noting, and this is kind of related to what we're about to talk about. It's worth noting whether or not guys make the next step. And I think that in order for this team to be good, several players have to make the next step in their abilities in their career and things like that.
I do love that in a segment about being skeptic, Clay has been optimistic in multiple points and areas, including age and all of this other stuff. I do love it. And it's on brand for sure. And I appreciate it. I think the one thing from a skeptic on my end is just going to be a little bit more grandiose. And I was just going to say from the skeptic side of me, everything that is currently going on with this team, it's all just a sham. Like it just all is like it's like we have all these new pieces, right? We have this new coach, everything's coming together. What if Nashville 2.0 is a joke and it doesn't work? Like, what if it is just garbage and we are in 13th place, like mid-season? Do you fire PJ? Is Mike Jacobs
What if
gone?
it's the Titans this year? Like everyone was excited about the Titans, and then the season started.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what if that is the case? And like that is, I think, the one thing that like I'm still excited. I'm still more on the optimist view, but that little inkling in my head does sit there of being like, wait, this is Nashville SC we're talking about. Okay, this could all just be garbage.
But Steven, even if that's the case, it would still be uniquely Nashville, and that's what matters. Let's bring it home, guys. I'm talking about honestly, in all honesty, I'm kind of joking about that, but I will say this is what fans have been asking for is the change in coaching, A, and B, a change in the philosophy and the way the team plays, and C, a change in philosophy in the transfer window. And all these three things happened this offseason. So look, it doesn't always work out. That's how soccer is. That's how sports are. So I think from like an owner perspective or like a big picture perspective, that is what the fans were asking for. Now they did put all their eggs in this one basket, and you're right, Stephen. It could all be a lie. Who knows? But at the very least, I think fans will understand that they tried rather than what we had seen maybe the 4 years prior, where it's kind of like, well, let's keep it at status quo because they're definitely not sticking to status quo this time around.
Yeah, and with that, Clay actually had another question posed, kind of in the same similar style that we're talking about when it comes to optimism for the season and skepticism for the season. Clay has another question, more player specific. So, Clay, what are you trying to get answered from myself and Valaire?
Well, so I kind of alluded to it a minute ago, but I think that for the team to be successful, for there to be a successful season, you're going to depend on a number of players to make a step in forward. Now, we talked about uh, Hani Mukhtar. Will he return to the Hani Mukhtar that we've seen? But outside of Hani, I think that that applies to a lot of other players in the roster. Now, first off, you can look at Gaston Brugman. Obviously, he won the MLS Cup MVP like in the final, but overall, I don't think that that season was considered a success by a lot of LA Galaxy fans before that for him individually. And I think like it was brought up by this conversation around Jacob Schaffelberg, was we've talked about on this show a few times. Like Schaffelberg is a very exciting player, but he's not like a young player anymore. He's 25. Like he's a guy who's an established pro. He needs to be taking steps forward. You need to see some level of improvement from him year over year. And right now, his stats are worse than Alex Moyles, which Alex Moyle gets a lot of flack that maybe Schaffelberg doesn't get for for doing, I think, on in terms of at least last season, for doing more and being a more effective player overall. And if Nashville's going to have a successful season, I think a guy like Schaffelberg is going to be a guy that has to make that next step to go forward. If he wants to play in Europe, he has to have a good season this year.
It's not even if he wants to play in Europe. I think if he wants to continue to have this buzz around him, it's gonna have to come with goals and assists, and that's the life of a forward. But we were saying the same exact stuff last year about Jack Mayer. Look, Jack Mayer is a guy who is 25 now. Yeah, he came in on a Generation Adidas contract. Nashville drafted him from college system. All that stuff is cool. All that stuff is great. But he's a player on $800,000 a year, 25-year-old MLS veteran at this point. You know what I mean? It's time to it's time to perform to that level, and it's the same thing. It's the same expectation with Jacob Schaffelberg. So I think expectation can, for some of these athletes, and I know I've talked to Jack on the show I did last year, like on air with Valaire. His mentality is there. He doesn't necessarily shy away from those moments. He's stepping up. He is saying, I want to be challenged and I want all that. Um, and he's saying the right things. Again, it might take a while to take off. And then also, young players ebbs and flows in terms of their form, all that. So, I think this is a new page with BJ Callahan for not just Jack or Jacob, for all of these players, but specifically, if I'm just going back to Jacob Schaffelberg and your point, Clay, like this doesn't have to be like, oh, Jacob Schaffelberg is a bad player type of thing. It's not that. Nobody's saying that. It's more so, okay, you've shown us some talent. You've shown us what you can do. Now, can you replicate that and do it consistently? And that's what differentiates these players who are making a lot more money and playing everywhere than some of the other players who never really end up reaching that level. And to me, that's the most important thing. It's not necessarily just like go from being not good or whatever to like great all the way, but maybe consistently good is what Nashville needs and is looking for.
Well, yeah, and I think for me, I'll be quick for the sake of time. When it comes to players making money and consistently being good, I think one of the players that I'm going to be looking out for the most this season is actually to be making a step forward is going to be Walker Zimmerman, because I do believe that this season for him is a make or break if Nashville is going to be his team forever or not. When it comes to, because this is his last year in his DP contract, correct?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Where a lot of people have asked specifically why are we paying Walker Zimmerman this amount of money as a DP when are the performances there as much as they should be? He's has brand new coach for the full season. He's going to be taking a higher leadership role. I'm very curious to see how he does throughout the season. And Walker for me is the player that I'm going to be looking out for a lot.
And this one is kind of, it would go unnoticed in this sort of question, but I do think it's worth pointing out. There's still some questions around Sam Surridge. Now, I think we all believe that Sam is a very good forward, and he's going to fit even better, I think. But he also needs to up his production even from last year to this year, because you're paying for goals at that side of the field and you are in a limited money, situation. And he was not signed by BJ Callahan. He was signed by Mike Jacobs, but he was not signed by BJ Callahan. And ultimately, if you're in a situation where you can buy someone out and you can move on if something doesn't work, I think that if they were in that situation, they would choose to make a move. Now, I don't think they will. I think that he's got more than enough time earned, but he needs to show himself to continue to be a DP level forward in MLS, because folks in MLS will cut strikers quicker than anywhere else if they stop scoring goals. I mean, we did not expect Ake Loba to get cut as quick as he did, but they did because he wasn't scoring. And so I think that is just that one's not realistic necessarily, but it's another thing to keep in mind, because that is the money position in the league. You have limited resources. Everybody spends on the same position. You have to produce at that position.
A couple other things I want to mention before we do end the episode. First of all, thank you so much for listening. Of course, thank you for being a part of 615 Soccer. As we stated, or as I stated in the beginning, our prop bet episode, my favorite episode of the season, is next week, where we do a prop bet for the season to just kind of predict how the season is going to go. We want you to be a part of it. So we are going to be having a Google form out sometime this week where you guys can pay attention, be a part of the prop bet episode with us. We would really appreciate it. We would love to have you a part of it. So you'll see something coming out for that this week.
Sometime next week, right? We're not releasing, because we're not doing the episode until Monday next week. So it'll be next week, not this week, guys. Just so nobody's expecting anything.
I'm excited. Okay, leave me alone. And before we do leave the episode, I do want to I don't want to do a prediction for a preseason game, because that's no fun anymore, because we've already done that a couple times. I want you guys to give your plugs. I want you to do all that stuff, and then I want you to predict who is going to win the prop bet episode. Who's going to win the prop bets this season? Who is going to win out of us? Valera, go ahead.
So first and foremost, at Valer Shabilla on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, and then 615 Soccer. You'll find everything there. So make sure to do that. And then I will say for prop bets, look, there's only one 4-time winner, and that's me. So why would that one time not be an anomaly? Let's stick with what works, mathematics, numbers. The numbers add up, and the numbers say it's me. So I'm sticking with myself because I gotta back myself in these situations. So the one and only Valer Shabila will win the prop bets.
Play.
I was really hoping that Valera was going to go into a Scott Steiner, the that's a wrestling reference, Steiner math promo there, but he cut it off right whenever it would have gotten going. You can follow me at Clay Soul on Instagram and on Twitter. I think you should check out Nashville Soccer Archive. I'm a little bit behind on getting it ready for this season, but I'm going to be working on that later this week. And then for who's going to win the prop bet episode, I think Valaire is the Manchester City of the podcast. He probably cheats and he wins every year. And much like Man City, he's going to be falling apart this year. And he's definitely going to lose to one of the listeners. And I think he's probably going to lose to Omari.
At PH Steven HD on all of my stuff, but go follow 615 Soccer. They're doing all the cool stuff there. We're doing all the cool stuff there. So make sure you go to that. I'm also going to predict an Omari championship this season when it comes to prop bets. I have a feeling that Omari's going to come on next week and just absolutely obliterate us with facts
All
and
the
knowledge.
pressure's on Omari. And
All the
he's not
pressure
here
is
to
on
speak
Omari.
for himself.
Thank you guys again so much for listening to the show. We appreciate it. Again, next week we'll be back with our prop bet episode and our first prediction for how Nashville SC is going to do, because we'll be predicting the first game of the season next week. So again, thank you guys so much for listening. We appreciate it, and we will talk to you next week.